So there's this thing called Matan Torah, or Torah. Matan Torah is useful because Torah is just a book of content with laws and minhagim and other things, stories. But Matan Torah speaks to a very interesting question, which is where that book comes from, or where those laws come from, or where those stories come from, or where those minhagim come from. Right? That's like the question. Like, so I want to distinguish first to have our question between Torah and Matan Torah. It's very important. We have Shavuos, which is not a Yom Tov of Torah, unlike what your Litvaks will have you believe. It doesn't say, and the Machzer is man limud Torah, or is man mitzvahs. It might say in the Machzer somewhere, in a poem, somewhere in a piyut, but that's not what it says in the Shemona Esrei. It says man Matan Torah, which shows us that there's two dinim. There's Torah. There could be a lot of senses of Torah, limud Torah, and the mitzvahs, and things like that. But there's something very particular, which is this, you could call it the story, but I'm not going to focus on the story, but this like aspect, or this part of the giving of the Torah, right? Understand my opening up a new aspect of things. And just like everything else, we got to understand that, what that means, so what is that for? And what I'm going to do is try to talk about it in a very basic. That's what we said, that we want to start things from Ephes, right? From zero. If you start anywhere with like, it says a pusik and there's not a pusik, we already know a lot of things, but we want to learn by not knowing anything and starting from somewhere. Okay, so we start like this. Like there's Torah, there's laws. By the way, again, this is a general concept. It's a universal concept. There isn't only Torah, right? Yeah, Matan Torah is where it becomes maybe more complicated. But there's definitely Torah forever, always. All people have a Torah. I mean, maybe there's some people that claim to live without laws, like some radical Bohemians or some people in the tribe in Brazil. They probably also have laws. Maybe they're unwritten, but they have laws. But there's such a thing as law. Humanity has, there's a lot of things, and we sort of like, we have somewhere to start with. This is not something that you got. This is important, right? Important because most people start somewhere else. Like you say, oh, there's a Torah. Well, no. The Torah is an instance of something called Torah. Can't be otherwise. There's such a thing. We have laws, we have regulations, we have stories, we have narrative. We have all the things that say in the Torah are things. We can start to think what they really are and what they do and how they work, but it's not something that you come and you said. In other words, when Moshe Rabbeinu came and said, I'm going to give you a Torah, nobody said, what's Torah? What's that? Oh, wait, that's not what they said. Oh, we know, we're going to give you a specific Torah, we'll give it to you. We have a different question, but that's an obvious thing. We got to, you got to have Mitzrayim, this is already a more specific way of saying it. You got to have Mitzrayim, you want to create this nation, this polity, this people. You got to have laws. Nothing works without laws. Or at least there's such a thing. So that's simple. So there's such a thing called Torah. Now the interesting thing, and this is where like this, I think that's obvious. I mean, that's why I think it's important to realize. I mean, if you want to speak in the content, now that we have this basic thing, we could say it in the context of Tanakh or of stories of Medrash, of whatever it is. I mean, if it says that Avram Avinu Vayishma Chikoisai V'Teroisai and so on, I'm not talking about the Sai part, the My Torah, that's the next part. But that there is Torah, that Avram, like, and you read the Torah, there are tzaddikim and Hashem before Torah. I mean, maybe you could always make a story of Adam Rishon and things like that. But there's such a concept, there are such people, and people that we don't really have, and we talked about this once, we don't really have in Judaism the kind of Christian question of what do people that never heard of Christ do. People that never heard of the Torah are fine, they also have a Torah, in other words. Where they get it from is a different question, but we don't claim to have originated the concept of Torah in like someday in Mount Sinai in the desert. There's such a thing. Okay, so there's such a thing. Now, there's something very interesting that we think, and this is how I want to present the idea of Matan Torah, that we say, or it's true, not we say, you have to ask a question, where do your laws come from? This is a very serious philosophical question that nobody in America thought of. We're very used to thinking that laws are just a thing. They exist. Like there are laws. There are human laws. There are things that we do. There are things that we must not do. There are ways in which we live, in ways in which we think, and all of that. And the question of where they come from is a very destabilizing question. Like you go to a guy, you say, no, what's a law? Well, there's all kinds of laws, like moral laws or just legal laws. All of these are questions, but they're all laws. Or Torah, kinds of Torah, mitzvahs, same thing, for these purposes. And you got to go to a person and say, where do your laws come from? Who made them? Where they come from is a more precise way of asking it. Because who made it is already presuming there's a who, and he made it. Maybe you don't make laws, I don't know. But where does it come from? Or why is there such a law? That's the same thing. Like our 4 whys, right? Remember our 4 causes, which are just asking the question why or what many times? That's the question. Or where is it from is one way of saying everything. Like what is it from? That's the question. And I think that most people, interestingly, like we have secular laws, nobody knows where they come from. At least nobody really thinks that they come from anywhere. There's theories, there's legal theories of where law comes from. Philosophy of law.
Some people have a more religious version with the founding fathers.
Yeah, you could say there was,
where they got
okay.
it from is not the
Exactly. So a person, that's just history. Again, if you're an American, you say something like this. Our laws come from the Constitution. Okay? And the Constitution gives Congress the right to make laws. So that's basically where they come from. Again, they come in the real sense, in the sense of what gives them their being, their legitimacy, their being a law, right? The fact that someone wrote a book and typed it up, that's not what makes it a law. That's just a book, right? So the law Shabbat comes from the Constitution. And where does the Constitution come from? From the Heilige founding fathers who wrote it. And okay, and where did it come to from them? Well, you could do history and say, well, they read all kind of political philosophy and they based their ideas on that. Okay, and where do those ideas get their toike from? Who makes them laws? Right? So there's a basic question here. For all laws, and this is true. That's I want to make this. It's true in every human that lives in any society. If you live in Vishnitz, then there's Vishnitz laws, which is you have to wear white socks on Shabbos, and you have to sing certain songs. And they come from, like, you got to ask the question, where do these things come from? And of course, there's historical answers, like we have white socks because, well, that's not a why it's a law. That's not even why it's a minig. I mean, minig and law are just a different version of the same thing. I don't want to get into this. Like, why are these things that we should do? Where does that come from? It's a good question, no? So what I'm saying is that now we're used to it in our like discourse, in Jewish discourse, we're used to having this concept of the Torah comes from somewhere. You have to realize what a radical idea this is. That's what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying here is nicht like the Weltat nicht like everyone thinks that Goyim, their laws, they don't have laws, they come from nowhere, so their laws are just wishy-washy, they can do whatever they want. But Yidden, our laws comes from heaven, comes from Har Sinai, and therefore they're very real. So I'm trying to make you understand that it's really the opposite. Goyim, they just believe in laws, they don't think too much. Goyim, whatever, like people that don't think, right? Non-philosophers, same thing as Goyim. They just, barbarians, they just have laws, they just do them. Why? Nobody knows why. Kacha. You could say it's just because they're afraid of the police that's going to catch them, but that's not why they're laws. They're still laws for some reason. But Yidden, we're not accepting that. We don't accept laws. Why? We always want to know why. Where did the law come from? Okay, we have an answer. Nobody knows what exactly the answer means. We have an answer. But we have this question. You have to realize that the fact that there's a Matan Torah says that we have this question. I always want to point to the questions before the answers, because otherwise you don't know what you're answering, right? We have this question. Where do your laws come from, Rabban Shalom? It's a very serious question, and we have a whole Chag HaShavuos to celebrate this question. To celebrate that our laws acknowledge this question. It's a real shaila. Where do the laws come from? Why are they this way? And like it means to say, if there wouldn't be a good reason, you shouldn't do them. Like, just because some guy decided that you should do this, like, why? Who told him? So that's my first decide. That's a very serious question. Where do laws come from? And Matan Torah tells us that we have to ask that question. You have to have an answer to that question. And that's also sort of going to make a difference in the way that you obey the laws, in the way that you do the laws, the way that you enact the laws. Because it's not just like some people would say, I don't care, right? This is a very serious, by the way, it's very serious. Who cares? The law, I don't care where it comes from. I don't care what the meaning of it is. I know that if you run a red light, you might get a ticket, so don't do it. Right? This is a very low way of living. It's the unexamined life, which is not worth living. Like you don't have an neshama, you only have like actions and incentives and things like that. And there's such a theory of law, okay, but if it's a theory, then it's already not only that. But there are people, but there's people that live like this, and there's people that live like this in Torah also. Like, why do we have kigel on Shabbos and not on Yom Tov? You know, it's like Shabbos you have to have chicken soup, and Yom Tov you don't have to have. Interesting, right? It's a law. Well, is it? Who cares? It's a law. You do it, right? Where does this come from? This law. So most people will tell you, well, it's a kacha. Kacha is a kacha. So that person doesn't believe in Matan Torah because he thinks that it's okay for laws to just be without having a source. Exactly. The new generation doesn't only mean it doesn't have a source. I'm trying to say it's not an external question of where does it come from, because I can answer that question. Okay, historically it comes from kach v'kach. We could ask historians to give us a story about this, but it's an inherent question. In other words, it doesn't. What makes the law a law? What makes the Torah a Torah? That's really the question of the source. We don't mean like the source in time.
It can be found in history and books, meaning it was located.
Maybe it can be. Maybe that's maybe history gives legitimacy to law. I don't know, but that's not the question that I'm asking when I say why do we eat chicken soup on Shabbos and not on Yom Tov? Like, where does it look? It's not like who was the first one to have this minute. I'll tell you. You know, the Baba, whatever, the first Baba that made chicken soup. For some reason, on Yom Tov, they thought that he doesn't have to. Actually, I actually think I'm not sure. The real traditional people have chicken soup on Yom Tov. I think it's only that because of that.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Maybe that's what I've heard once. Yeah, because I have know people that give Yom Tov chicken soup also because they hold themselves more. So I can tell you where we could do research and we could look in the old cookbooks, but that doesn't make it a law. That just tells us where the law is from, right? We have this difference of different kind of causes. It might be a kind of cause, like a material cause, or how do we call it, a efficient cause, whatever. I'm not don't have to get into the details, but it's not. It doesn't answer the why question. In other words, it doesn't answer what makes the law a law, right? Same way answering the Torah is because, just to be very clear, in the same way answering, well, we have the Torah because there was a guy in the desert that went on a mountain. That doesn't either answer what makes the Torah a Torah. In other words, that doesn't answer you what's Matan Torah. It just tells you a story about it. Okay, maybe that. Maybe someone will tell you, yes, it's history that makes laws. Okay, that's a certain theory. It's already out of history, that theory, because it's not a story of how we got the laws, it's a story of what makes the laws into laws. Maybe history is a justification for law, ich weiß nicht. But that's already would be a kind of answer. It's an
or at least limiting the
option
question to a certain.
No, it's an option to answer the question. You say that's the story does make it a law. Okay, maybe you would have to assume a certain kind of laws that history can make into laws.
Make assumption about history.
Both about history and about laws, and then the third thing that connects them.
Yeah.
So, but the point that I'm saying is that Matan Torah, the idea of Matan Torah is that we have to be able to answer this question. That's the only thing that, like we say, if the Torah, like all Yidden say, if the Torah wouldn't be from Hasin, it wouldn't be the Torah, right? It would be something else. In other words, it wouldn't be a law, because Torah just means a law. It wouldn't be a law. It wouldn't be. It would be some kind of other things. We have kind of funny words for this. It would just be a minhag. It would just be folklore. I don't know what all those things are, because they're just another word for saying law. But in other words, it wouldn't be that. So that's the shaila. That's the shaila. Very serious question. Very serious question. You asking my question?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I could go to sleep. Now I told you a question. Now you go all Shavuos and you
mad.
say it out to ask everyone. Maybe they wouldn't even understand the question, but I'm just saying. Okay. What do I want to say about this? What could we say about this? Manyan. So that's like this. I think that the ways to answer this question, let's try like this. The ways to answer this question would be, would depend on the ways we answer any source questions, right? Any where it's come from or what makes it what it is, right? Makes sense. In other words, if you are some kind of Adam Hazanik, I don't know, everything just starts from people's wills, for example. If you think that everything is just arbitrary, things just start from, in other words, if a good explanation of human behavior or of nature is just that it's the way it is, just that someone wanted it to be like that, as if that explains something, then you can have such an explanation for Torah too. In other words, let me try to make this a little more clear, because this is going to get into like real controversies. There are people that if you ask them what makes a chair into a chair, are happy to say that nothing makes it into a chair. It's me sitting on it that makes it into a chair. It might be true for chairs, right? Maybe chairs are not real. But assuming that chairs say something more real, right? What makes my father into my father? What makes a human into a human? So some people would answer, nothing. It's just like a convention. There's all kind of living things. There are apes. There are things that are similar to humans, and there are angels which are also similar to humans. Who knows? There's ants. There's all kind of things. They share all kind of attributes. And for some reason, us, these few people of us, this is the Foucault theory of knowledge, right? Or really like it's presented in Plato, right? For some reason, the people that share this kind of these attributes or these qualities, like they know how to speak in a certain way, they know how to talk, they know how to think in a certain way, and they know how to cooperate in a certain way. These are people that decide to give themselves the name human beings. It doesn't signify anything real. And it's really their will that imposes itself on the world because they figured out how to convince other people by this, and they kill everyone that doesn't agree, all the Neanderthals and whatever that didn't agree, and maybe even the people, other races of people that we at some point we did the same thing to, and so on. And there's no real difference between doing that and doing it to apes or whatever. And that's what humans are. So in other words, the explanation for things can stop by, I want it to be like that. Now, this is not only a story about humans, it's a story about what kind of things can explain other things. Right? I can explain it by some kind of like brute life or brute will. The will to power or whatever. The will to, I want to be stronger than you. Why do I want to be stronger than you? No answer. Kacha. That's where it starts. Right? This is the God. This is where the explanation starts, and it sort of makes sense. Like, because in your head, explanation is all excuses for that. Right? Explanations mean finding excuses for power, finding excuses for will. There's a theory, very serious theory, people that think this. That's what explanation means. Why does, and they would answer that that's why these kind, if you believe in that, you can answer the same kind of thing theologically or cosmically, right? You say, why do trees grow in the summer and sleep in the winter? Yeah, there's an excuse, because they're cold, makes their leaves die, and they wouldn't be able to survive in the winter, so their leaves fall down, and that also makes the snow not kill them. And then in the summer they bloom. And then you ask a few times more why, and you end up saying because God wants it to be that way. And all these things are just excuses for God. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying that if you think that most of humanity's like concepts and categories in which we categorize good and bad and people and other people and people versus animals, even all of that, can boil down. I'm not saying historically, maybe they do, I don't know. But metaphysically can boil down to people wanting it to be that way, some kind of brute will. And that's a real explanation. Everything else is just excuses. People, in other words, they're just expressions of this brute will, right? Because I want to kill all the apes. Now there's different ways, like people talk about cooperation, right? There's different ways of getting them all to be dead, right? If I can't convince all my fellow humans, in other words, all those fellow people that I can convince to take up weapon or to take up arms against the apes, or whatever exactly it is that humans do to nature. If I can't convince them, then I wouldn't be the human. I wouldn't be the guy that's on top of the food chain. So what we figured out was language or shared beliefs. This is an extremely cynical view of humans, but also it's an extremely certain specific kind of way of understanding the world. Right? We figured out that the best way to get people to cooperate with you is to make them believe the same thing as you. So the first human is the guy that taught all the other humans that they are humans. You never heard this theory? You know this theory. I'm just trying to express it. That's the first human, and this not because he identified in the world such a thing as human. It's because he wanted to kill everyone that's not human, in other words, everyone he could. And the best thing he can do is get all the humans to cooperate. So he taught them that they're humans, that they have souls, and the other animals don't have souls, or whatever it is. And he created this concept as an expression of his power or of his will. So the concept that we say, well, what explains the difference between humans and apes is humanity. You say, no, that's just an excuse for the will. Right? That's where all explanations are really excuses, and ultimately they boil down to will. Kacha, Omer, Nietzsche, and a bunch of other people, and Thramascus and the Republic, whatever. People have said this forever, and Glocon and so on, in the book too. Okay, Thramascus, I don't remember how you say the guy's name. The guy that's arguing against justice in the beginning of the Republic. That's what he says. There's a guy in Plato's dialogue that says this, and other people, Protagoras and whatever. Okay, Bekitzer. Now, that's one mahalach, and this mahalach is based on a certain metaphysics. In other words, it's based on the idea that rationalizations are just rationalizations, and real ultimate source of everything is the will. Well, everything, and all these concepts are just excuses for that. And that kind of person could explain the same thing about the world itself, right? Then you say, okay, so who made humans and so on? There's still a question left, like a physical, metaphysical question, cosmological question. You say, well, God wanted it to be a world. Nobody who cares why. Just a brute fact. That's God. We don't. Here we sort of have a nice religious way of saying it because we can't explain God. Blah 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 blah. But basically, it's modeling God on the worst theory of humanity, right? Anyways, but there's like very fancy, nice ways of saying this because maybe somehow to say that God wills is better than saying that He knows who knows why, because it's like not an explanation because it's like just a brute force. It's like life force, something, energy. Energizing, whatever.
People see
Anyways,
this as the most
this is supposedly the most religious mahalach. And therefore...
What, the kachel chavetz?
Can. And... Therefore, the reason, in other words, if you ask why the world is the way it is, or even why there is the world, it's because kacha uratza, and just blind or brute will. That's what God is. And... Now, of course, that's not. Of course, there are, and exactly, and of course, there are all these conceptuals. We're not denying that the world works, and that there is, for example, if you talk about mitzvahs, you say, well, God just wants you to wake up and cook chicken soup Friday night. That's what He wants. Okay. By the way, this is what you have to believe because I don't know. And I want to say this because people are going to say, well, that's not a mitzvah. That is, it's only the Rabbanan. What's the difference? Does God want it or doesn't He want it? Who cares what's the exact history of it? That doesn't seem to make any difference. If it's a minhag, you should do a minhag, so God wants it. I don't care. All the steps in between don't make a difference to this. I think people are very confused. They think that saying it's just a minhag saves God. It doesn't save anything. In other words, it's just a human thing. It's not a real thing. Okay, so why are you doing it? Like you got to decide which side you're on. I don't buy this whole levels. I mean, maybe I could explain it in a different. If we'll have a different theory, we could explain it. But if you're in the God's will theory,
depends on human action. Meaning,
if you're in the God's will theory, then a minhag is the same exact thing as the deraisa. I don't see any difference. You gotta say, does God want, just add this very only question? Okay, well, just a side note, just for the vision to chassidem, to be mechazik them.
I'm not gonna get so punished if I do either on this thing.
That's weird.
Less.
So God wants things more or less. Either He does want or He doesn't want. Anyways, I mean, maybe, I don't know. Okay. Well, you got a shtickle gehanim for not eating kigel and a bigger shtickle gehanim.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. Maybe that's true. But again, that might be true. That might be true. But that's still just in the game, right? That's just an excuse. God has his unexplainable, unscrutable wants, and of course, in order to get people to do that, it seems to be hard to just give people a very long list of a bunch of details. Eat gefilte fish this day and chicken kigel that, whatever. And that day and so on. So He made it into like these rules. It's like these generalizations. There's deraisa, there's this mitzvah, there's that. There's some kind of logic to it, but that logic is fake. That's what I'm trying to get at. Everyone agrees that there's tamya mitzvah. There's some logic. Like there's not just random lists of stuff. Like don't eat things that have even like for example kashrus, which is like one of the considered the chak usually, right? It's still not random. We do say don't eat any animals that are toiref, right? Don't eat any predator animals, right? Don't eat any, basically animals that eat meat, animals that eat other animals, right? There's a certain generalization here. But people would say, well, that's just an excuse. Or even the simunim, that's not a deraisa, but even the simunim, right? Don't eat any animals that don't have split feet and whatever. We say, no, but that's not the reason. That's just an excuse. In other words, it's the same thing like an they're giving the same theory. What I'm saying. It's the same kind of, it's just an excuse for will. So in order to will, for will to work, in other words, it's a manipulation, right? It's a manipulation. In order, just like when I want to kill all the animals, I don't really care if there's such a thing as human distinctive animals. Well, I want to do that, and in order to do that, I manipulate you by teaching you that humans have souls and animals don't. In the same way, God wants us to not eat this list of animals and to yes eat that list. And it would be hard for us to remember that whole list, or we wouldn't buy it if it doesn't make any sense. It would seem totally arbitrary, whatever. So therefore, He manipulates us by giving us some logic. He says, don't eat any animals that don't chew their cud and have split hooves. That's what He says. But it's just a manipulation. The whole Tamya mitzvah, the whole Torah, basically. The whole fact that the Torah is obviously, and there's questions to what extent, but at least it's not totally just a random list of do's and don'ts, right? They're organized in some way. They have some kind of chachma, they have some kind of logical organization, but that's just a manipulation. That's just God using arranging things so that His power gets enacted. Because, and again, going back, because the way we understand things is by power, by will. That's the ultimate explanation for everything. And therefore we explain the Torah this way. And therefore, if you ask me, What is the source of the law? It's basically what Thramesk something said, which is the law or justice, same thing, right? Is the will of the stronger. Kachu Amar. Socrates wants to know what justice is. He says the justice is what the strong people want. Of course, they convince you they have this whole manipulation regime in order for it to work. Because if they would pretend, they would tell everyone that, nobody would listen to them. So they have to say something else, but that's really what they mean.
And you have to ask yourself if the best manipulator is the most powerful.
Obviously, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yes. I mean, part of power is manipulation by logic and by reason and all these things, yeah. Where does it start? If it starts from being the smartest or it starts, I don't know, doesn't matter. Asking a metaphysical question, what's first? Maybe it starts from being smart and being able to come up with rationalizations. Okay, could be. That's possible. Yeah, that seems, so now if we go back to ask our question, what makes the law a law? What makes the Torah a Torah? When we say what makes it that it comes from heaven, right? It's Misina, it's Torah min Hashemayim. If you say that it's not min Hashemayim, you basically don't have a Torah, right? And what does that mean? What it must mean is that there is a guy in heaven, a God, and he wants you to do these things. And that's why you should do them, basically. That's an Hashem. It's not really a reason to do them. It's just because God is bigger, stronger than you. No, I mean, this is not so crazy like I'm making it sound, because it's true that God has all the power. That's one of the ideas of God, at least, the ultimate power.
In this sense, we're reducing it.
The ultimate power, and in other words, the Torah is sourced in the power of God to get His will done. Thy will be done. That's the Torah. He could do whatever he could also get you to do whatever he wants. Well, one of the ways of him getting you whatever to do what he wants. Now, and just be very clear, he could have. That's why this question, you end in a certain. You understand what I'm saying? It's not crazy, because it's true that God is ultimately the power.
Model. I don't think it's very
That's what most people think. It just means that Torah, as a thing, is not a thing. It's just a manipulation by God. There's no such a thing as Torah Messina. It's just God's will.
You to do his ratzon.
Yeah, and now why? Now, therefore, we would have to ask this question, right? Because if there's you end up with a certain question, and try to explain it, and you have to end up for that question. You'll also say, well, it's just arbitrary will. But you end up with a certain question like this, and people ask this question, and I didn't make up any of these questions. You end up with a question like, okay, God just wants certain results to happen, or He wants certain things to happen, and therefore He does this whole long manipulation story. Now, when it's me trying to get me and my friends to beat up the other next town, I can understand why I need to teach them that we're a nation and we're special, because it's hard to convince for humans. It's hard to convince other humans by literally applying their power. I don't really have that kind of power. The only power I have as a human is this thing, right? But God doesn't seem to need that. I mean, one of the ideas of God is that He doesn't need to use manipulation. Doesn't need to use manipulation in the sense He doesn't need to use tools, right? He doesn't need to get to one place via another place. He can just get you directly. So why would God waste His life by getting us to do things by saying that there's chava, and if I won't punish you, just do it. He should just do it himself, basically. Or if He wants me to do it, He should get me to do it.
The question exists in a way that it doesn't for humans, which is why use this manipulation and not another.
Yes, the same question, right? Same kind of question.
Humans don't have that question, right? Because you're using the manipulation.
Because the one that's available to me, exactly, the one's available. Yeah. There's necessity, but God doesn't. This doesn't seem to make sense to have necessity limiting God, or that kind of necessity. Like,
so the question of why this law and not another law is much sharper here than it is.
Well, the why, the result, you just say He wants that, but why does He get that where He wants in such a circuitous route? Like, why is He going all around and giving Torah? And then we could talk, like, people will say, okay, because free will, and there's some reason why He wants this whole complicated way. It still seems to not explain. So the big problem is, then you can answer that. You can say, well, that's also just because He wants it to be that way. And in other words, He doesn't. Which would mean He doesn't really want the result. In other words, the fact that the fact that the Torah claims to want a result is another manipulation. Because that's the only way you can answer this question. This is a serious theory.
Either the result or the method is a manipulation.
If in other words, I did with this. I'm just what I'm doing here. Yeah, what I'm doing here is like starting from like a pure thought and trying to show you where all the options that actually exist. I'm not giving you their names because it would make people feel bad. But how those options get to where they get to in a very simple way without quotes and anything, right? If what the law or the Torah is, that God wants certain results, then there's a basic question, why does he do it this way? It's a very long way for no reason, right? Because he can obviously get those results directly. So then you would answer, right, why does God need manipulation? The Torah is a manipulation. It doesn't seem to be correct to say that. So you say that God just wants the manipulation. That's hugifa. God wants it this way. Why does he want it? Inscrutable will. He wants this whole manipulation. In other words, what's the manipulation is the fact that it says that he wants something else. The whole, right, exactly. It seems to say in the Torah that God wants it to be a tzaddik and not a rasha, but that's a lie. He wants exactly what happens. That's what he wants, because obviously he has all the power. Exactly. No, and he also wants some people that don't need the chicken soup, and because you understand what I'm saying?
The law's going to have people that follow it and people that don't.
Because the part of his manipulation, like the manipulation of the Torah, is this whole story where
it's just the outcome of some people following the law, some people not. I mean,
right. If he would want the outcome, he tells us. Let's say it like this. He tells us that he wants the outcome. That's what it says in the law, right?
Right.
It seems to say that at least a certain outcome. Listen, at least obey the law, right?
Mm-hmm.
But saying obey the law, in other words, there's such a yesh kazeh davar law. That's the story he tells us. There's such a thing as law, and I want you to obey it. Those are two steps which are unneeded if he just wants the thing that happens by the obeying it, right? So you would say, no, he wants those steps by themselves. In which case, the fact that he says that he wants the result is a lie. That's the manipulation. Like you're saying, one of these two is a manipulation. Either they're saying that he wants the result is manipulation, or what's the other thing?
That he wants the method is a manipulation.
Well, or he doesn't.
The law is being used as a manipulation towards the end.
Right, which doesn't really make sense.
So,
which is impossible for God, because God doesn't need to manipulate anyone. So you have to go to the other option, which is that the end of the manipulation. The end of the law is not that people should follow it.
It's just to get whatever outcome.
It's just that there should be the law.
When the law is there.
Yeah, exactly. Not only the outcomes. The whole process is all direct divine will.
The outcome
because you have to remember,
coming from God to us.
It's not only about law, right?
Whatever happens after that is the will expressed.
No, exactly. In other words, there is no cool ends and means for God, because that's weird. God doesn't have to get to any end by any means. There's just ends. Everything is an end. Everything is an end. And the fact
necessarily includes the law.
Everything in the world is an end. This is true for the whole world, including for the giving of the Torah. Everything is an end, because in other words, God wants everything. The fact that the world seems to be organized, there seem to be ends and means in the world. Seems to be a Torah in order you should listen to it, or whatever. That's a lie. That's basically what what Sharia thinkers say about human will, right? The fact that I want to move my hand and move it. There are two manipulations, two lies. Those are two separately things that happen each by themselves directly by God, and the fact that there's a connection between them is just how it seems. It's not true. And the same thing will be for Torah. They say it explicitly. I'm not the one that says this. There's some chassidus that say this explicitly. God doesn't want the result of the Torah, because if he would want the result, he should just do it. Like, you want tzaddikim, make tzaddikim. Who's stopping you? So you want Rishonim, said, and you want this. Not only do you want Rishonim, you want this whole line that there is a Torah, and you should want it, and you should hope that, because in other words, the actual idea of Torah, or the actual idea of logos, or there being a law in the world, is that there are things that are needed for other things. That's what it says in the Torah. And that is the big thing that, according to this pshat, is a lie. It's just a manipulation. And it's not even a manipulation, because it's just because we're not saying that God manipulates it. It's just all fake. Every step of the mahalach is fake. Okay, so that's one pshat. That's one pshat. Like I'm saying, the real problem with this pshat,
whatever God's will is, it just lands.
It is already
being a law,
directly.
People following it, people not following it, it happening, it not happening.
Yeah, and more than that, the fact that there is a law. Law means there is a correct way to act.
There's a law. There's followers, not followers, and everything in between.
And there's a mahalach to it. There's a way of it should work. The fact there's no way.
And what we call a manipulation of the law.
There's no way. There is no way. There's no derech Hashem. There's no derech HaTorah. There is just everything that happens directly because God wanted it and finished. And the fact that it is a law and it says if you will do it, and there's all these ifs.
Just shapes of the will.
Yeah, it just lies. And in other words, the shape that we could say you're imposing the shape on it.
Right.
It's just God's will imposing itself on you, and that's all. Mm-hmm. Like in other words, it's analogous to the guy to all the useful idiots and all these things. Like you do propaganda. And not because you teach people to believe in certain results, like if you're a really cynical, evil general, you send your soldiers to attack somewhere, not because they want them to take that city, but because you want them to attack. And in order for them to attack, you need to lie to them that they're going to take the city by that. You're not really going to do that. It's all a game. That's what happens. Now, this is not a problem. You could say that. It's a consistent theory. The only thing it's not consistent with, or unless I think the real problem with this is that makes the actual idea, which seems to be true. In other words, we might say that we can observe this directly, We don't need like a book to teach us this. It makes the idea of Torah, or the idea of a law or of order in the world, a lie. In other words, it's an explanation. It's sort of
irrelevant.
Exactly. Instead of explaining the law, it explains away the law. Right? It says there is no law, because what this is explaining is basically not law.
But the law definitely doesn't have a divinely privileged status.
Doesn't have a status at all.
Right.
It dissolved.
Saying is there is no in muktim mukhar in the scheme, right?
It's a consistent scheme. It works. It just denies the existence of Torah.
It works because you're just saying the whole thing is chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Not chaos. You would say a direct imposition of will.
Right.
You could call this chaos, but they would deny that they would deny the name of chaos, because they'd say that's just what it is. Chaos is just like because you want there to be order.
Implications. It means that there's no way of isolating reasons.
Yes, and it means what it means is, to be clear, what it means is that there's en Torah, en kazadavar Torah. In other words, we didn't explain it; we explained it away. Showing, and this is a baya. Well, why is it a baya? Because there is a Torah. Because there is such a thing as a Torah, and there is such a thing as, that's what it says in the Torah, and it seems to be. It's not an argument, but it's
to be the case.
No, it's not really an argument, but it seems to say there's a Torah, and like most people go around saying we believe in the Torah. So that's one baya. Another baya is that it seems to be definitely, but generally true. There's arguments pro and con this, but there's at least good arguments for there existing order and a law by itself, without belief, without saying that it says in the Torah. There are good arguments for this. There are many atheists that believe in this, whatever. Well, if you're atheist, if you believe that's a different question. But theoretically, you could be an atheist. I'm a Platonist atheist. There's such a thing. Anyways, I don't know if it makes sense, but there's such a thing.
What?
In order.
We separate?
In order of things. Or if we're talking specifically about the law, in the fact that there is a law. There's such an idea or such a thing called law, which says the correct way of, which means, what does law mean? It means the correct way of things happening is this way. Sometimes things fall away from that. The law doesn't have to include everything, but that's the idea that there's such a thing. In other words, if I say Hashem Nasan Torah b'Sinai, right? According to the first pshat, that's not really true, because Hashem lo nasan Torah, he nusan mitzvahs maybe, or he imposed as well. He didn't give a Torah. There is nothing to learn. Another way of saying this, another way of saying this, which is important, I think, is that there's nothing to learn. According to the first pshat, there's nothing to learn. Not in the real sense of learning. Of course, you could say learn like in the sense of you want to chazer. How do you say remember all the exact things that the will wants you to do, because that's the way he manipulated you into do it.
But that's also
or maybe there's even
the will
or maybe
also has people that don't do that.
Let's skip that part. Let's skip that part. I'm just saying or you could say there's even some generalizations which are just making it easier for you to remember, or something like that. But there's only mitzvahs. That's another way of saying it. There's only mitzvahs. Because mitzvahs sort of makes sense. Mitzvahs is Hashem wants us to do this, and we have to do it. Now we have to learn in order to not forget to do the mitzvahs. Now you're saying that God wants that also said. That's also true, but let's leave that out, bracket that for a second. That's what turns out. Now the fact is that it's not true. It says in the Torah that there's Torah. And there's such a thing as learning. And there's no way of saying that learning, and this is something some people seem to believe, but that learning is ultimately, like Tanya seems to say this, learning is ultimately just describing God's arbitrary will. In other words, it's just buying his manipulations, his propaganda. Which seems to be incorrect to me, because that's not what learning is. That's not what thinking is. That's not what chachma is. And it says in the Torah that it's chachma. It says that it's learning, something to be taught. And if it's something to be taught, it means that there has some kind of sort of independent existence. Not that it's a thing. There is such a thing as a law. You understand? Now what does that guy say? Now this guy from the first theory tells me that I'm apikoros, because I say that there's a law, and enter min hashamayim. Right? Keeping track. He says I'm saying that there's such a thing as wisdom, like logos, right? Maybe it was forever, maybe God created. These are questions. But there's such a thing. It's a nifrad, right? The Chabadski will come and tell you that I'm saying there's such a thing as Torah. There's not really such a thing as Torah. It's only God. Only God in the sense of God's will. Right?
It doesn't have independent intelligibility.
The Torah is not intelligible. Exactly. God definitely is not intelligible. His will is definitely, because will is not an intelligible thing. That's not what it means. Will means not intelligible. So therefore, he would say that you're saying that God doesn't want us to do mitzvahs. It's just like somehow, in other words, somehow there's some eternal law. There's some kind of way in which things should be, logic or science or something like that, then that's not why God came to Har Sinai and gave us the Seres HaDivros. That would be the argument. The Baya is, what I would answer is, going back to the first, because I'm just keeping on the first question that I asked in the first 10 minutes of this shir, that I would tell them that you are the Apikoris, because you think that there are laws that just come from themselves. Al-Atzad, you say Al-Atzad, that there's a order, that there's a law. It's not from heaven, that's what you're saying. And therefore, I need to deny that there's a law, and say there's only a will, and that I understand that comes from heaven. So you're a very interesting kind of Apikoris, because you don't agree with this question that laws have to come from somewhere. Understand? Because I say that, of course, there is Torah, there are laws. How we know them is one question. But there is such a thing. I'm not asking how they know them. And on that thing, I want to have a question, where does it come from? And the answer is going to have to be, it comes from Mishamayim. That's the only place it can come from, to make it into a Torah.
To make it, why? Because to make it also well?
No, to make it os human will, or even worse, right? To make it os...
Or even os God's will, at least in the way of...
I don't want to make it os God's will. I want to make it os nothing.
In this brute sense of like, just undirected or...
In other words,
unintelligible will.
Yeah, but I want to make it also I want to take it out of human wisdom in the sense of just something that people make up or something like that in some way. I don't even know what that would mean, but let's...
The law the law is a fact of the world and not of the people.
Not of God, or it doesn't come from God. Again, some people, the only way they can conceptualize it coming from God is that God wants it to be that way. And according to them, when someone else says no, the Torah is wisdom, like it says in Sefer Mishle, wisdom which was forever before there was a world, at least I don't know forever, but before there was a world, then you tell them, well, what does that mean? Wisdom is independent of God. So you're a Pekoidus, so you're like secularizing, you're naturalizing the Torah, they say. You're secularizing it. You're doing some kind of philosophical trick that Rambam or whoever did, and you said the Torah is not really from God, it's some kind of philosophical thing, I don't know. Now, what my argument about that person is, that person didn't seem to internalize the first question that I said, which is that laws, assuming that there's such a thing, not explaining it away, need a source that makes them into a law. We need to figure out what it is that does that. But that's a question for me. I don't think...
But importantly, a source that makes it into a law, and not a source that just makes it exist.
Exactly, of course. It can't make it always law.
The first guy's going to tell you that
that's number one.
Source that makes it
that's
exist,
one. That was one argument. One argument had that guy is that you explained away the laws. You said there's a source, but there's no laws, right? And then he says that I am making laws without a source, right? And I want to say no, that you're weird because you think that if there is law, they have no source. Why would you think such a thing? There is laws and they have a source. Both of these can perfectly work, and then I won't have to say, if you're a Litvak, you don't deny that Torah is from God. You're learning not God's Torah, you're learning your own Torah or something like that. No, I'm learning God's Torah, which is a Torah, and this is the thing that Torah Messina needs to mean. I have to figure out how it works. But that's my thing. And you're a weird Epikoidus because you think that wisdom just comes from nowhere. Because obviously there is wisdom. Well, okay, it's God's manipulation. That's your answer, but there's no wisdom. But if there would be such a thing, such a real thing, it would just come from nowhere, which is a very weird thing to believe. That's what my thing is. So, Elamai, we have to say that we have laws. Now, which are these laws is a very good question. I'm not gonna get into this. So speaking only metaphysically, but there are laws. I don't know if it's the kugel and the thing. Maybe now we could make a difference in the rice and the rabbanon. But maybe there's no law to say that you should eat gefilte fish. Maybe that's not a law at all. In other words, you don't have to do it. Or maybe you're doing it, but you don't have to do it. That now I can make those differences, right? If in the Chachma theory, I could say that there's the rice and the rabbanons and different levels, because those are less of a law, or maybe they're an application of a law. We can have a theory that explains that.
A possible instance of it.
It's not a necessary law. It's a possible law. Things like that. Mm-hmm. Exactly, which means kind of part of the law, but it's formed by humans. You can get into a whole. We can explain that actually. But what I want to say is the Matan Torah is saying that there is a Torah that is in heaven. And then I would say a third thing. I have to answer a third thing to the first guy, which is something like this: that your God is a weird God, because you decided for some reason that will is a better thing to ascribe to God than wisdom. And of course, I agree that what we call will and what we call wisdom are not exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so got to define it in a more abstract sense. But whatever it is, since God exists, not only does he exist, he exists necessarily, and this is a logical fact. God doesn't exist by his own will, which is a weird thing to say. In other words, nobody forced him to exist, but he must exist. Right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It sounds weird. So you say God is forced to nebuch if he can't commit suicide. No, he can't, which is fine. Not a braya. That's the whole idea of being God, that you can't commit suicide, even if you want very much, or even if you want to like put yourself into a body and die on the cross, whatever. That you can't do that either. At least not for real. That's what Jews believe. I don't know what Christians believe. You could pretend to do that, which is fine, but whatever. Then again, manipulation, right? But what did I say? So in other words, so wisdom is, and this is not the same thing that we call wisdom. Again, you're like, but this can't be a source. It's not the same thing. That's why I'm saying there can be a Torah and it can have a source in God, which are two things. Those two things can be true, without denying one of them. We can have certain laws, which, well, we're speaking in the most abstract sense of those laws, and even those, in other words, the necessity of those laws.
You can speak about God as a source in ways other than his will.
Exactly, because God, and whatever he is necessarily what he is. I'm not even talking about what he does, which might also be necessarily. There's nothing God can do. Yeah, it's just this is a stupid question.
It's a weird way of
when you
saying
say no, those people, that's what they think. It's a stupid question. No, it doesn't. The question doesn't begin. Right. But he does not. God exists in a wisdom way. Of course, he doesn't exist as wisdom. I'm not saying that. But what the kind of thing that he is he must be.
He's not restricted to will.
Yeah, will is a very weird thing, which we put like that as primary. I don't know why you would put that as primary. I would put other thing. Maybe wisdom, again, intellect is a lower thing. Whatever you could say as unity, you could say a bunch of things. But that unity is also, I don't want to get into like Neoplatonism, but that's also a kind of a intellectual thing. In other words, it's a thing that is not like that because someone wanted it to be like that. That's the important thing.
Is a one of intelligence. It's
like I'm not. That's what I'm saying. No, not exactly. But we can. I'm not getting to that because these things have meaning and we can't confuse them. What I'm saying is that there's no reason to think that God is like some kind of just wanting or something like that, or life or whatever. We just have to say that he is a kind of thing that exists and thing that must exist. And things that must exist, that's really the definition that we're looking for. Something that has to be the way it is, right? There's a certain way God has to be. There's no choice about it. You can say that. That doesn't make. It's weird to say it that way. It's wrong to say it that way. But
right.
There's a way in which it should be, has to be, by necessity of wisdom. And so let's skip this problem of and. Therefore, there can also be things that are somehow sourced in that. Because of the way in which God is, there is also ways in which things that are not God, created things or emanated things, whatever you want, should be. And that should be is precisely what we call law, because law is just the should be, right? The order of things, the way things should be. And there can be even lower things which are not as they should be, which is why we need to give them law to make them as they should be, right? That's the story of Matan Torah, of the Torah coming down from God to heaven to us, because we're not as we should be. And now, how could we not be as we should be? We can explain that also in the ways of necessity, in ways of because of this being the material world, it has to be in ways that it can't entirely embody the law.
To be strictly a product of will is a start, right?
Mm-hmm. Not only that, being able to explain that there is a should be, there is a way things in which things should be.
Or should be that isn't what
which
it is.
Would be rooted in. And then I'm not talking about potential.
Be in a real way that it should
the
be
correct way of
right?
things, the correctness of things, the correctness or the goodness.
So that it really
these kinds of things.
Else.
No, it doesn't have to. I don't have to get to that. That's true for things like us.
Right.
Well, that's already a third level. I'm not even getting to Torah. Is not how it should be. The Torah is the abstract should be of things, the correct version, the correct way that things should be, that the world should be, that everything should be. Now again, that's why we can start talking about Torah and heaven, because Torah is not, and this is unlike the Rambam or other people, because Torah, this idea, in other words, God's wisdom, okay, now which is not doesn't have to be identical to God. It can be a created thing, even if you wanted to make it say that it's created. I don't mind. You have to get into what exactly what it means. In other words, I'm not saying that God, that's God. It's God, but it's God's wisdom. Now, if it's God's wisdom, it means it's a way in which the world should be, a way in which created things should be, which is rooted in which the way God is. And we have to figure out like the way of connecting this cause and effect somehow, which the Platonist way is to say that it mirrors it.
Same, right?
It's not the same. It's not identical. It's not the same being. The Platonist way is to say that it mirrors it, that the way in which the world should be, or the logos.
If the Torah is, let's say, what it should be, and that should be is based in God, it's based in God's what? Or just based
and it's not based and it depends what you mean by the word based. That's what I'm saying. You could say mirrors. Source. Yeah.
It's sourced in God's what?
Source in God's necessity. And the fact that God is the way in which God should be.
Okay.
Now should, you have to take away the word should. Should doesn't mean that he's not currently the way he should. He's currently also the way. It's actual, not potential. Yeah, exactly. It's not, no, that's why when I said the word should is confusing you. I shouldn't say this word. The correctness. Okay, forget about should.
Okay.
Should makes you think of potential. There's no potential here. Or think before potential was invented.
Think that perfect.
Exactly, the perfection or the correctness of things. God is a correct way for God being, and that correctness,
of us being.
and well, not only for us. Who we're not even thinking about us. I'm thinking about the concept of laws. Yeah, laws of nature. There's Torah for birds too. The Torah in the sense of they're existing an order, right? A way for things to be, a correct way of things to be. Now applying that to things, that's already a third step. That's why I have this. That's why I said there's Torah in heaven, without which the giving of the Torah doesn't work. And that's really what it means when we say that this Torah, when we say there's a way in which you should, here there's a should, right? I am not the way I should be. But there is a correctness, a correct way in which I should be.
There can't be a world without a Torah, and now there's a world with it.
There can't be a world. The Torah was created before the world, because otherwise the world wouldn't exist. Exactly. Because the world has a way in which it is. And in some ways it falls from which it is, because of the kind of world it is.
Right.
Not all worlds are that way. There might be other worlds, and more intellectual worlds, which are exactly the way they should be, and therefore are always listening to the Torah, and their Torah. But and they have a Torah.
Also.
What?
Could there be worlds with no Torah?
No, there can't be a world with no. Yeah, this world is the world with no Torah before Matan Torah.
Right,
that's the interesting thing. And the sense of before human souls, not Torah, just the human soul. Before human souls coming into the world, in some sense, in this before you have to speak not in time but metaphysically, because there's no such time. Maybe before, maybe by the Neanderthals, whatever.
But I mean, in theory, there could. Meaning, world can be understood independently from the Torah that it now has.
No, again, the world. I'm assuming a lot of things here that I probably didn't explain, but because I'm assuming a certain picture.
Without a Torah?
Because then the world would fall apart. The world without a Torah. This is what Chazal mean. Basic Platonism. A world cannot exist without a way in which correct way in which it exists. Because then it wouldn't exist.
It's trying to move.
It would just fight with itself. Whatever. It would just stop existing. It would have no way of. If there's no way, in other words, if it has no limit, right? If it has no exactly. It would not have any organization. Now, this world is not a very perfectly organized world, so it has some.
It's a somewhat organized world.
But it's somewhat organized, and it's at least organized in the sense that it exists and does not exist. That's the most basic sense. And every possible word that you can think of is going to have that organization. Exactly. The container would be that it exists and it does not exist. Right? God doesn't exist or not exist. But this world exists. Anything that you can imagine is going to be existing, which means it has some kind of Torah, some kind of level of. Well, you might not want to call it Torah, but beside it, because
it's somewhat what it should be, but not entirely what it should be.
No, forget about the should. Maybe it doesn't have potential to be more than that either. I'm not even getting into that.
But it's at some stage of.
It has some correctness. It has some order.
Some stage of right.
It has some reason. It has some explanation. In other words, an explanation. In other words, it comes from God. Same thing. It has an explanation. God made it. There's an explanation beside it. It has an explanation, which means it has a Torah. Now, if you talk about the Torah that we're talking about, is a very specific instance of all of this. Mm-hmm. That's why Chazal talk about the Torah, which was before the world, and the Torah coming down on us. And the whole coming down means that the fact that there's a correct human being, there is such a thing, which is not us, which is very weird, because the correct Malach is just the Malach, and the correct human being is not, because humans have had this weird story of like souls falling from heaven somehow, and have potential, and it's true in some sense for everything in this world, but especially for humans. But the way in which we should be isn't made up by God arbitrarily. It's sourced. Now we can have to explain how. I didn't give you any details, but at least it could be sourced in the way that God is, and sourced not in the sense of like being a same identical to it, just being another thing which reflects that, or mirrors that, or embodies that, how you wanna explain this kind of thing.
In a way that's necessary.
And in a way that could be for it, right? In other words, like we read Aristotle, to be God, this is Plato's language, right? It's our language. Everything wants to be God insofar it's possible for it. This kind of thing it is, right? You want to be. In other words, we talked about. We could go back. We talked about Pirivirivri, right? We talked about the most basic sense of a soul wanting to perpetuate a species. That's what it is. That's what it's for, right? Which is a mitzvah. First mitzvah in the Torah. It's a mitzvah. Not only it's a mitzvah that has Bashas Bereshis, it's actually a mitzvah. And where does this mitzvah come from? Now, if you're a guy, you could say it comes from nowhere. It just makes sense. Let's talk about this mitzvah. The first mitzvah is it's actually amazing that it's the first mitzvah. I mean, in the order of the Torah. I don't know, whatever. So the first mitzvah is to have children, which is also, according to Aristotle, the first thing that we define as soul by. And why do you have children? What's the source of this, right? So we could say all these theories that we said. Well, people have this tatzatava.
So Adam is the first one that has it as a given mitzvah, which is
exactly, because that's what means
this theory.
Exactly, 100%. Now, and you could have all these theories about this. I'm going to finish with this example. We have all these theories about this. We could say, well, people want to have children, whatever. They like to have children. Nobody knows why. Or you could say, no, it's a mitzvah, which means God wants to have children. Nobody knows why. He himself doesn't know why, right? There's no why. It's just I want.
So for the first person, the tzivui wasn't given to Adam. It was just there the way it was for the animals. It's very.
Beseder.
I'm just trying to understand it and make sure this is
you could say.
There is no. You should.
That's what that was like a goyish.
Kids, you're having kids, and
that's like a goyish theory. That's like a goyish theory, and then there's a Yiddish theory which says like, no, it's a mitzvah, which says.
It's a mitzvah, meaning it's a Torah,
which means it's God's wants it to you to do it.
It's a mitzvah with a Torah, right?
You could have it being just plain, which are the same theory. That's what I was trying to say. This Yiddish theory and that goyish theory are the same, because you could say that just nobody knows why people want to have kids. It's just a drive that they have.
Nobody knows why God wants you to have kids.
Exactly. But but that guy is supposedly from.
Right.
And then there's a third guy that says that you want to have kids because that is what your soul is. And I'll ask you, why is your soul like that? In other words, it's a nature. It's a necessary aspect of being a living animal. Not only being an animal. Not only like I said, not only, it says for animals also. It's the same mitzvah. For being a living animal. Now you'll ask me what makes living animal. So what's now? Then you'll say, okay, now I'm not because you said that it's just nature. It's not from God. So I tell you, no. Of course, it's from God. Why do animals want to make children? They want to have children. This comes from God because animals want to be like God. Why do they want to be like God? One is a weird thing because I'm very strong will. Animals tend to be like God, right? They're directed towards. Right. Their inherent. Their being is inherently is trying to be God, or is directed toward being God because their being is from God, and it's so to speak trying to emulate God. Now it can't be God because God is forever. And how did you say? A number is the same forever. He's identically one forever, but we could be in species one forever, or for as long as the world exists. Or we can try to be forever. And in other words, in throughout time, right? If you look at the whole time, there's always humans, which is a very beautiful way, like a perfect example how the mitzvah is from heaven. In other words, the perpetuating your species it has a source. It didn't start by the species. This need or this tendency towards perpetuating your species didn't start in that species. It's not something humans made up in any sense. Humans might have identified it at some point. Or might have given it a name, called it a mitzvah, but it's rooted in God being forever. And now God being forever is a necessary attribute of God. There can't be a God that's not forever. It's not God decided to be forever and didn't kill himself at 1 week because the world was so messed up. He just has to be forever, and this has to be what causes. Now, how does it cause, and like what kind of relation that is? We have to like explain a metaphysics to explain. But that's just showing you that whatever it is, that's just the rootedness of the law coming from heaven is exactly that. It has a source and everything, and that's what explains it. What explains the humans or the animals trying to perpetuate themselves is them being from God, who is forever. And of course, you can add a bunch of levels in between them and God. That doesn't make a difference. And and now some humans don't. Now some humans are sick. They don't want to be forever. So then we have this like story of the Torah coming down to them, of God coming down, which means just in this sense just means that there's ways, there's also structures for this. This is not, the ladder that God, so to speak, went down by Har Sinai wasn't created then. There is such a ladder. That's the whole idea. Okay, and there's a ladder, which means that there's a way, and this is another level. Like this
ladder that exists for this title that others have a different system.
That one doesn't think there's no ladder. It's
Right.
just flying up and down. There's wings, but there's no. It's a ladder, and there's a silam. It says Yaakov in it. There's a ladder, right? There's two shittas about malachim, which is the same thing. How things come from God. Malachim just means things coming from God to us, right? So some people think there's malachim that fly, but some Yaakov in said no, they crawl up a ladder. Okay, which means there's a system for it. Okay, and then the flying is just a metaphor for that ladder. That's what the Rambam says. Anyways, and Silam is Gematria Sinai. That says in a lot of Sforim. Sinai is a ladder. And this is a ladder which is a way for us imperfect beings to get to our perfection, to what we should be, to the correct way of being. And that's what Matan Torah is. That's both the source of the Torah and the Torah coming down all the way to humans. In other words, that it's not like some Malachim would say that there's no use, these things are lost because they have no possibility of being perfect. No, they do have a possibility of being perfect, and there's ways to that. And the Torah, this is why the Torah is not exactly identical. That's why we do have cheesecake, because it's not identical to the perfect state. The perfection is when we die, when we actually achieve the perfection that the Torah is for. But in order to get to that, there's another whole system, really, which is ways of getting the potential actualized of humans. And for that, we have cheesecake and gefilte fish and all those things. Whatever, I'm just saying that those things are actual, not eternal things, right? Those are not the Torah itself. Those are the Yeridas HaTorah. Exactly, that's why we have all these things which are trying to get us up to that ladder. So that's my sheet about Matan Torah, and everyone should try to be playing on this on Shvias until you get the Torah and makes total sense. Bye.